Yeah, I'm sorry it wasn't more talkative this afternoon, but I was on my way to have lunch with some folks.
Understand.
Tony, can you hear me?
I had just found a parking place.
Can Brian and Tony, can you hear me right now, or not yet? Doesn't look like it. Testing, testing. Tony, Brian, can you hear me?
Hey, Pat.
Nope.
Are there many members from the public?
I see one person.
No, as far as I know, there were two. I haven't been back down, and we can't see them because they will be, oh. I guess, right. Oh, Ryan, can you hear us? Let me see.
Well, if you're doing a budget presentation, we need to hear you.
I agree. Can you hear me now?
It's showing council chambers as muted. Can you unmute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome.
Ryan, just let me know when you're about to start so I can start recording.
I'm basically ready when Tony is.
Recording in progress.
Well, I'm ready. Good evening, everybody. This is the public hearing for the 22-23 budget. This is April 6th, 2022. And this is a public presentation by the town manager, followed by questions from the public. And that's the only thing I'm going to do is just introduce Ryan Aylesworth, our town manager. Go ahead, Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. 1 second while I pull up the presentation. All right, hopefully everybody's seeing that okay with the share screen. Tony, if you could just verbally confirm that.
I had muted myself, but yes, we can see
Okay,
it.
wonderful, thank you. Well, we are joined by a couple members of the public here in council chambers. So for those of you who may have seen the presentation, for those of you who watched the presentation I gave a week ago, it'll largely be the same presentation. We always do that for the public information session of the budget. And just as sort of a, I guess, order of operations thing here, if you have a question, please feel free to interrupt me if you have something that needs clarification on the spot. But in general, holding questions to the end will probably work better. And also for those in council chambers, if you have a question, please do utilize the microphone that's in the room, because otherwise the people watching on Zoom will not hear you. Only I will hear you. All right, so without any further ado, let's talk about the budget. So one of the things I want to stress at the onset is that when developing the operating budget and the capital plan, and when our department heads went about the exercise of developing this year's operating budget, we always use as sort of our guideposts our long-range plan, our plan of conservation and development. So that's called Mansfield Tomorrow. And these are the guiding values. So I'm not going to, list these or regurgitate all of them, but basically to say that, these are the big picture, broader aims that we're always trying to achieve, and we want to make sure that what we're budgeting for and carrying out in our day-to-day operations are consistent with the values and principles of our plan of conservation and development. Just to put the conversation that we'll be having today about local government in the right context, I want to make sure we're all on the same page about the core functions that municipal government is responsible for carrying out. And these can be boiled down to health and safety, welfare, and record keeping. And as this list shows, in the town of Mansfield anyway, we have a wide range of municipal services that we provide. These are grouped into broader functional areas. But the town of Mansfield, the residents of Mansfield, have for years enjoyed a very high caliber of municipal services. And the budget we'll be talking about tonight certainly looks to sustain and in some cases enhance that. But this is the full breadth of services that we as a municipality provide. An organizational chart. This is just to remind everybody that there's a lot that goes on in the municipal government outside work carried out on a day-to-day basis at the staff level. Basically, all municipal departments and employees and the work that they do kind of fall below where the town manager ellipse appears in the chart, but we have a wide range of boards and committees, some elected, some appointed by the town council. And then also, as you can see to the side of the diagram, we have a number of shared services. These are services that the town and Mansfield Board of Education, or the town Mansfield Board of Education and Region 19 collaborate on and share to gain more cost efficiencies. I want to talk about some recent accomplishments from this past year. This is not an exhaustive list, but it gives you a good sense of some of the things that we've had going on. One, our financial condition and our overall affordability as a town, I think, has been on a good path. We've had a stable tax rate for 3 years. Our current mill rate is 31.38, and it has been the same for 3 fiscal years. And our general fund unassigned fund balance, which the town council has set a goal of achieving a fund balance that's equal to 17% of our overall operating budget. We continue to make progress toward that goal, and we'll talk about that, what that all means more a little later this evening. We continue to address at the local level the pandemic and ramped up our local response and tried to find ways to make sure that we were providing people at a local level the resources and assistance they needed as we continue to navigate year 2 of a pandemic, global pandemic. We continue to make progress in terms of stakeholder engagement and outreach and communications. We launched the first year of what I hope will become an every year occurrence, a Mansfield Local Government Academy, giving residents an opportunity to gain exposure to all facets of municipal government and meet with all the different departments and tour facilities and just learn the ins and outs of what we do and the programs and services that we provide and the projects that we're working on. We made progress with respect to planning and development on a number of fronts. We completed and published a affordable housing plan, a major new multifamily development, the Standard at Four Corners, has gone through the review process, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and that project will be moving forward in the year ahead. And in collaboration with the Downtown Partnership, really an effort led by the Downtown Partnership, but in collaboration with the Downtown Partnership and our partners at UConn, we worked on developing a new strategic plan for downtown stores. With respect to capital projects, some of the things I would point to is we have a new elementary school that we anticipate will be opening its doors to students and faculty and staff next fall. And this will be the first net zero public elementary school or public school in the state of Connecticut, which is a very impressive feat. And along the same lines, when it comes to environmental sustainability, when it comes to the roof replacement project at Mansfield Middle School, we'll be installing a photovoltaic array on that building to continue to reduce our carbon footprint. We're in the process of basically phase 1 of a municipal facilities needs assessment. The next phase would be conceptual design work, but right now we're trying to identify exactly what our needs are and what changes we think we may need to make in the future to address both current and anticipated future needs. And likewise, on the school side, the Board of Education, Mansfield Board of Education, is going through a similar process for the middle school in terms of completing a modernization study and trying to figure out what upfits and changes to Mansfield Middle School are needed to best educate and best provide suitable learning space for our children in the future. Our Human Rights Commission has been very active as we continue to make progress with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're doing that on a number of different fronts. The town has received substantial funding from the federal government by way of the American Rescue Plan, and with a lot of input from staff and the public and the council, we continue to finalize, and the council continues to finalize its plans for how those once-in-a-generation funds will be used for the highest and greatest needs of the community. And we continue to work on resetting the relationship with the University of Connecticut. As many folks know, last summer we had kind of a low point. There were some actions taken by UConn that were really discouraging and cause for alarm, we felt, at the local level. And so, we've been working diligently to make sure that UConn understands where we take exception to those actions and try to ensure that it doesn't happen in the future. And one of the ways that we're trying to do that is work with UConn in a collaborative way on a shared framework for economic development. So figure out those goals and objectives that we can work together on and that we don't disagree on. With respect to challenges and opportunities that lie ahead, things that we'll be tackling in over the coming year, some of these, connect back to the things I just reported on that we've been addressing this past year. But the council will finish its work on figuring out how American Rescue Plan dollars will be allocated to various projects. Along these lines, we want to roll out a plan of action for helping to stimulate local businesses and help promote local economic growth, and doing that through a variety of different means, including making additional progress on a marketing and branding strategy. Ultimately, we feel that Mansfield is a very desirable community, a great community to live, work, play, learn, all the above, and we want to make sure that anybody who's paying attention and takes an active interest in Mansfield will see that. We want to maintain and enhance our already top-notch municipal services, but always look for ways to do so in a cost-effective way that's taxpayer-friendly. We want to address, as I alluded to already, aging and inadequate town buildings, and look towards phase 2 of that needs assessment study that I referred to. And we need to make sure that Parks and Recreation, which has experienced some financial sustainability concerns, not just Mansfield Community Center, but also including other programs like our summer camps. We want to make sure that that Mansfield Parks and Rec is on financially firm footing, and that its revenues that it's generating is meeting the expectations of the council, and ultimately that the facilities and programs are meeting the needs of the community. We want to continue to address roads and bridges and drainage issues. The town council is aware that We got ourselves a little bit of a hole, no pun intended, in terms of a maintenance backlog and just, frankly, subpar investment in these sorts of capital projects for many years. And so when we do upgrades and replacements of these sorts of infrastructure, we want to make sure that the way we tackle the project, the means and methods we use, are not just cost effective, but actually have, that they last longer and that they're not breaking down and causing problems in a shorter period of time. We want to continue to make progress on our affordable and workforce housing plans. We want to make sure that the town in the future has a housing stock, whether it's affordable housing or market pricing, any type of housing we have. We want to make sure we have a housing stock that meets the full gamut of needs and price points that our residents or prospective residents could want. We want to successfully open our new net zero elementary school, and we want to make sure that we continue to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, promote stakeholder engagement and open government. And with an eye towards the future, we want to begin somewhat of a pre-planning process for the next iteration of our plan of conservation and development. So, these are 10-year plans. We have a few years before the current plan of conservation and development expires, if you will. But it's never too early to start thinking about what the next iteration of that plan should or could look like. And along similar lines, we want to continue to, build on some of the foundation, new relationship that we've established with UConn on our shared goals for economic development. So pivoting now into more squarely the thrust of tonight's discussion, the municipal budget. I want to make sure that, again, we're all kind of operating in the same context about what the purpose of the municipal budget process is. A budget is a policy document, and it's arguably the most important one because the way a organization, a municipality in this case, the way it spends its money tells you, in essence, what matters most to it. You're going to generally spend more money on the things that are bedrock, priorities and values of the community. And we want to make sure that this document, this budget, reflects what's most important to Mansfield as a community. And it's also important to just underscore that our budget that gets approved on an annual basis is really two parts. It's an operating budget and it's a capital budget. So what exactly is the operating, or what exactly is the budget development process? I like to think of it in this sort of diagrammatic sense. It's a wheel, and for several months, the top of this wheel was where the focus and attention was, the staff development of operating and capital budget requests. Where we are now is basically just the second step. The town council is taking up its review of the budget recommendation, and the process will continue to work its way around the wheel from here and will extend beyond the adoption of the budget at the May town meeting, and will include execution of the budget and then later the audit, the independent audit of the budget once the year is complete. But I also want to point out that information informs all of these steps, and it really is an iterative process. So while the wheel, in a sense, is a cycle that's unidirectional, information flows back and forth in all directions. This is a synopsis of the town council's broad goals and objectives for the budget process and budget policy. I want to emphasize that the budget recommendations that I, as the town manager, submit to the council really are a starting point of discussion. It's not by any means the end. It really is the beginning of the process. And then throughout the month of April, as these budget workshops with the council play out, it really is an opportunity to confront trade-offs and decide what we want to invest in and what we can and can't afford. I want to kind of start with the end of the story at the beginning, because I think it's important for some of this, for context purposes, to be stated up front, so that as I start to dissect the numbers, where we end up will make more sense. So I want to state at the onset that the budget that's being proposed does call for noteworthy enhancements in service delivery and improving the caliber and the depth and breadth of the services we provide does require corresponding investments to make that happen. There are a number of significant cost setters that are driving escalation in the operating budget. Many of these are outside of our control, and I'll explain that a bit more in a minute. And maybe most importantly, I want to make sure everybody understands that despite what's proposed in this budget and the associated increase in operating costs, we are projecting a mill rate that goes down. So we are expecting that people's tax burdens will still go down if this budget were implemented as proposed. So this is the FY 22-23 budget snapshot. As you can see, the overall general fund budget is a little over $60 million. The town and Mansfield Public Schools component of that stands at just under $49 million. And our contribution, our expected contribution to the Region 19 budget is about $11.6 million. And we have an overall capital budget of about $5.6 million. And that will draw from a number of different funding sources that we'll talk about more in a minute. When it comes to the revenues that the town receives, our revenues come from a variety of different sources, but really it's the first two items on this list that comprise, about 99% of the overall revenue that the town receives for its operating budget. Taxes and state aid we sometimes refer to as intergovernmental funds, but the top two really are by far the largest sources of revenue that the town receives. Licenses and permits include a variety of different things, from marriage licenses to building permits, and everything else really constitutes a very small diminishing percentage. So what does that look like graphically? Well, for the current budget that's being proposed, as I said, about 99% of the overall budget would be funded from tax revenues and state aid. And I want to show a breakdown of our revenue sources for the last 6 years, 5 years plus the year that we're projecting. And as you can see, generally speaking, the split between state aid or tax revenues and state aid has been around a 2-to-1 ratio. It's like a 2/3, 1/3 sort of split. With respect to our grand list, this is of course the tax revenue. Very close to the same percentage increase as we saw last year. So last year, I believe the grand list increase was about 2.4, 2.5%, and this year, our assessor's office is showing a grand list increase of just under 2.4%. Real estate is largely flat. Personal property is up about 10%, and motor vehicle is a much larger increase, and this is attributable to a number of different factors, including, my understanding, the state of Connecticut, the DMV, kind of getting caught up on how it establishes values for vehicles, which have been lagging behind the rising values of used cars. I think anybody who's been on the market for a used car recently, or checked what a dealer has on their lot, has seen a pretty stark increase in what somebody would pay for a used car. And so the assessed values of used cars that our population has, likewise, has increased substantially. This shows the town's grand list over a little over a decade. And as you can see, it's been a pretty steady, reliable, albeit modest rate of increase. And if you fit a line to this, it would be a pretty gradual ascent. When it comes to state aid, we talked about this a bit last year, so just to recap, there were some legislative changes that went into effect last year that favored Mansfield. There were changes in the way that the town's payment in lieu of taxes, the monies that we receive for state-owned property, which is obviously largely Yukon in our case, some favorable changes that have increased the amount of money we receive from the state. Our education cost share grant, ECS, is projected to remain flat based on the governor's proposed budget. And we are expecting the likely enactment of some legislation that would cap the the property tax rate for motor vehicles. So in Mansfield's case, our motor vehicle tax rate, our mill rate, has tracked with, been identical to our real estate mill rate. In other communities, that's not the case. In some cases, the motor vehicle mill rate in a given municipality might be almost twofold what their real estate rate is. And so those communities would feel this change far more drastically than we would. The state does intend to make somewhat of an effort of providing funding to towns to make up that gap, that reduction in revenue that it will experience from this mill rate cap. However, it's important to note that just as I showed that the motor vehicle grand list has increased substantially from last year to this year, unfortunately, the state bases the amount it owes to us based on the prior year's grand list. So basically, that 25% increase in growth that I showed, that would not be factored into the calculus of the revenue we would receive from the state related to this cap. So I believe that equates to somewhere in the neighborhood of about $50,000 in revenue that the town would lose out on relative to if this law doesn't go into effect. So we'll see what happens, but right now we are budgeting with the expectation that the law will be changed and this 29 mill rate cap will go into effect. I talked a little bit about this already, but the new pilot funding formula, pilot is short for payment in lieu of taxes, last year created a few different tiers. Mansfield is a tier 1 municipality, which means we have an equalized net grand list per capita of less than 100,000. And so that means that fully funding us, or full pilot funding for us then would be a monetary amount that's equivalent to 50% of the assessed value of the tax exempt property. So we are not currently receiving what we would classify as full pilot funding, but as you can see from the next bullet point, the amount of pilot funding we received this year was dramatically higher than it had been in past years. We jumped from a little over $8 million in pilot funding to just shy of $14 million. It's about a $4.7 million or 57% increase from FY 2021 to 21-22. And we have every reason to believe that this enhanced level of pilot funding will continue in the future, that the legislative changes will remain in effect. And so when it comes to how we budget for this year and how we anticipate budgeting for years ahead, we are basically building into our assumptions a continuation of the current pilot funding formula. And graphically, this is basically just showing the same thing. It's showing that basically when you get to FY 21-22, the actual amount of pilot revenue that the town receives jumps considerably. And then the green bar is showing what we are anticipating receiving in FY 22-23, and it's about $100,000 more than the current year. So sort of in the grand scheme of things, kind of a nominal increase. So starting to break down the FY 22-23 budget, starting off with some highlights. The budget that I'm proposing would result in a 1 mil decrease, about a 3.2% decrease in the current tax rate. It would allow us to sustain or enhance service levels in a number of priority areas, chief among these public works, public safety, community development, and social services, and allows us to meet our contractual non-discretionary obligations and continue to fund a pay-as-you-go capital plan, which basically means that we are, as a rule of thumb, we are funding as much capital projects as we can with cash, as opposed to bonding or borrowing the funds and having to then absorb interest rate obligations. So what's driving increases in this year's budget? This is a list of things that's largely the same one year to the next. Employee wages and benefits, and associated service improvements they'll talk about, our investment in capital projects, interfund fiscal support and transfers, debt service, and just general cost inflation for goods and services. Our general fund budget, $60.3 million roughly. This is how it breaks down by category. The dark blue region is the Mansfield Public Schools proposed operating budget, just a little under $24 million. And our contribution to Region 19, $11.6 million. And then the remainder, which are, again, broken out by functional area, is the town of Mansfield, the local government portion of the overall general fund operating budget. And so this is how it breaks down by entity. As I said in an earlier slide, there are a number of drivers, things driving increase in the municipal portion of the budget that are beyond our control. And so pointing to a couple of examples of what I mean by that. When we consolidate from 3 elementary schools to 1, the Board of Education, which was responsible for the operating costs of all 3 elementary schools, will now be responsible for the operating costs of the new elementary school. But once Southeast School is demolished, that leaves Goodwin and Vinton, so 2 large buildings that now the town is basically the sole custodian of. The Board of Education will not play any role in the use of those buildings or the operating costs associated with those buildings once they move into the new school and cease conducting any education there. Likewise, the debt service associated with the new elementary school, that is a debt obligation of the town. That does not show up in the Board of Education's budget. So the added debt service associated with the construction of the new school, which we all know we bonded to build this school, that's a major 6-figure sum that hits the town's budget. So I just point to some of these examples of things that are driving the increase in the budget that, are not things that the town, so to speak, went looking for, but it's things that just by virtue of change in sort of management control, if you will, of various town buildings, the town now inherits. So within the sort of broad bucket of what we would call obligated and non-discretionary increases, that's this sort of first category here. It's about a 6% increase. So before we start talking about any additional, growth or expansion or improvement of services, this is basically what the budget would be doing in terms of a year-over-year increase, essentially just sustaining what we already do. However, there are a couple things to note here, as I just alluded to. You'll notice debt service is up a little over $600,000, and that's because of the new school that's coming on board and the borrowing we're doing to fund that project. And then similarly, energy, about a $100,000 increase year over year, and some of that is rising costs of energy, but the lion's share of that is, the town just having to assume responsibility for maintaining a workable temperature in Vinton and Goodwin School, because you don't want pipes freezing or things of that nature happening. And then we can move down into operating expenses to enhance services. And this is where additional investment for new proposed staffing and enhanced level of contributions to area social service agencies and some of the other things that we'll be talking about are situated. When it comes to a section of our budget that we call townwide expenditures, they're all listed here. These are things that don't really fit in one municipal department. They really are townwide. They cut across departments, so things like our municipal employee retirement plan, our contributions to Social Security and workers' comp, medical insurance, etc. That's what's going on in these areas, and collectively they add up to year-over-year increase somewhere in the neighborhood of $474,000. Just a quick note on Mansfield Public Schools' proposed budget. Later on in the budget season, the council will be provided a much more detailed explanation of what's in the Mansfield Board of Education budget. So this really is just a snapshot. As you can see, overall, the district's budget is down a little under $43,000 from one year to the next. And you can see where they're able to achieve a number of those savings. $200,000 in energy expenses that have been transferred to the town, some reduction in employee benefits because moving from 3 schools to 1, there will be less staffing in place to administer that 1 school, so they're achieving some economies of scale there. And then repairs, again, they're not going to be responsible for a facilities maintenance budget for the 2 schools that are becoming the responsibility of the town. I want to talk a little bit about fund balance. This is a term that gets thrown around a lot in meetings about the budget. And based on conversations that I periodically have with folks, it seems clear that what fund balance is, not everybody's on the same page. So let me just quickly, for context purposes, make sure that we have a sound working definition of fund balance. Fund balance is an accumulation of revenues less expenditures in a governmental fund. Another way of basically saying the same thing is that it is the aggregate difference between assets and liabilities in a government fund. So think of it as sort of a, it's on a rolling basis. The aggregate amount of money we bring in relative to the aggregate amount of money we expend out. What fund balance is not, and this is where I think there's a lot of confusion, fund balance is not the amount of cash we have on hand or in a bank somewhere. So when I say that our fund balance is X amount of money, that's not to say that if you took the current bank statements from the various places the town keeps its money, that all of that would add up to that amount of cash on hand. That is not the case. It's kind of a net worth. It's a net worth of the fund, I guess, is maybe the best way to put it. Fund balance can be used in future years for purposes determined by the town council. Really, there's tremendous latitude on what the town council can use fund balance to fund. However, as a best practice, and certainly something that I would advocate for as the town manager, would be to use fund balance for one-time, non-recurring things, much the same way as we use our capital funds to fund one-time, non-recurring things that have a longer lifespan and that we're not paying for on an annual basis. Some towns use fund balance to offset or minimize any changes in their tax rate on an annual basis. And again, that's perfectly above board thing to do, but you can get yourself into some trouble doing that. And it's just from a best practices standpoint, it's not the best way to use fund balance. Any surplus revenues in excess of expenditures at the end of the fiscal year become part of, i.e. added to, the fund balance. So looking at the fiscal year that we're currently in, FY 21-22, if at the end of the year our actual revenues exceed what our budgeted revenues were, and or if our actual expenditures are below what our budgeted expenditures are, we would end up with a surplus, and that would become part of fund balance. So what has our fund balance done over time? The town council instituted a fund balance policy, I believe that was circa 2012. You can see on this graph, if you go back to 2012 and years prior, fund balance as a percentage of the overall operating budget was quite low. A healthy range, a healthy target balance for a municipality's fund balance based on guidance and recommendations of subject matter experts, the GFOA and other experts in public finance would say you want to have a target fund balance of somewhere between a minimum of 8% of your overall operating budget and somewhere a maximal sort of range of about 17%. So you want to be between 8 and 17% of expenditures. And so we achieved the low end back in, I think it was 2015, it looks like. But the council back in 2012 set its target, its goal at 17%. And as you can see, we are just now closing in on or ever so slightly eclipsing that goal. So this graph shows this is really good news. This shows steady progress, but also shows that we've achieved an important financial policy goal that the council set about 10 years ago. I want to talk a little bit about service improvements. Service improvements are areas where departments have proposed additional levels of investment, largely in the form of staffing, to provide a higher level of service to the community. So first, fire department has proposed 4 new full-time firefighters/EMTs. The council has been made aware and has supported a grant that the town applied for. It's a staffing assistance grant from the federal government, from FEMA. If we got that grant, the positions in question, the salary, the benefits, basically all of the direct hard expenses would be covered for 3 fiscal years. We would only be on the hook then for the next 2 years, years 4 and 5, and any period of time after year 5 that the town wished to continue the positions. However, at this time, and it won't be until after we conclude the budget season, we'll find out the outcome, the disposition of our grant request. So we don't have the luxury, I guess what I'm trying to say, we don't have the luxury of leaving this investment out of the operating budget now if we want to fund the positions, and we found out later that we didn't get the grant. So this budget proposes putting funds in the budget to start these positions as of November 1. You see the reference to 2/3 of a fiscal year. So that cost figure represents the cost of those 4 additional firefighters, salary and benefits for 2/3 of the year. Human resources. Right now, our human resources department is basically 2.5 full-time staff. It's a human resources director, a full-time human resource specialist, and a part-time human resource specialist. And we'll talk about this in more detail during tomorrow's presentation, but suffice it to say the demands and the workload of the human resources department has increased quite a bit over the last couple of years. And so the human resources director has proposed converting the part-time human resource specialist position to a full-time position. So you'd have 3 full-time people in that department. Human services. We have basically a growing need for youth services in that the Region 19, our regional high school, has conveyed a receptivity and a desire to see the town engage in ways that it hasn't historically with high school age kids. And of course, Region 19 being a school district, the services it provides high school age kids, they can only go so far because they're really responsible for what happens in the kids' school life. When it comes to home life or issues outside of school, you really need a youth services social worker to do that. And so this budget proposes the creation of a part-time youth services position that would be focused largely on the Region 19 student population, but would also allow us to provide more staff supports to the work we already do at Mansfield Middle School, because we're seeing an increase in caseloads and need for assistance there. Finally, within human services, the budget also proposes an increase, what amounts to 5 hours a week for our existing nutrition program coordinator, basically the food service that's offered at the senior center, converting a 25-hour-a-week position to 30 hours, adding 1 more hour each day for 5 days to better address the nutrition needs of our seniors. Within the town manager's office, the town manager's office historically has had a MPA, a Yukon MPA intern. It's a 15-hour-a-week position that's been assigned to the town manager's office throughout the academic year, so basically starting in late August and continuing through May. And we want to reinstate that position because there's a lot of work that we're trying to do. And there are a lot of really impressive top-flight master's students that are capable of helping us out. Planning and development. Planning and development is proposing to reclassify the existing Planner 1 position, which is our zoning officer, amongst other responsibilities. Reclassify that to a higher grade that's more appropriate or more commensurate with the responsibilities of the position. And that would be a net increase in base pay of about $8,700. Also proposing the creation of a full-time community services coordinator position, basically to help with a increasing number of financial assistance grants programs that the town is offering our residents, and then service and support for community development software. With respect to police, our resident trooper supervisor actually proposed the addition of 3 new full-time police officers, 2 of which would do patrol, and 1 that would be what he's calling an admin trooper, because it would be working daytime hours and be primarily assigned to the schools and youth services. My feeling was that I supported the creation of the admin trooper position. Not prepared at this point to recommend taking on the additional 2 patrol officers that were recommended or requested. But I do see, as we have just propped up this regional youth justice diversion program, of which our resident troopers are a part, having a trooper in the office who, again, works a daytime shift, is available during the day to respond to instances, issues that surface at the schools, but can also participate, be the primary liaison, if you will, with the Youth Justice Diversion Program Board. I do see the wisdom in making some additional investments in that area. Public Works, the budget proposes the creation of a new full-time entry-level mechanic. So historically, the mechanic shop within DPW has been 1 senior mechanic and 2 mechanics, and we're looking to go instead to 2 mechanics and 2 entry-level mechanics. So there would be a total of 4 mechanics, just no senior mechanics, so there's a little bit of cost savings at the top end. And that's being proposed to come on board as of October 1. So those would be the second, I should say, entry-level mechanic would come on October 1. So we would continue to operate with 3 mechanics between now and then. The budget also proposes the creation of 2 new full-time drainage crew member positions. As we've talked about in a number of council meetings, I know there's a keen awareness on the council's part that we have a lot of catch-up to play when it comes to failed drainage in town, and we need additional labor inputs to do that. Facilities. Facilities has proposed, with the support of the town and Mansfield Board of Education, the creation of a new full-time custodial supervisor position, the cost of which would be shared 50-50 between Mansfield Public Schools and the town. So we have a director of facilities, we have an assistant director of facilities. Right now, the assistant director of facilities, who is also a licensed electrician and can do a lot of really important facilities planning and maintenance functions. The assistant director spends a lot of time basically as the de facto supervisor of the custodians. And for some time, the management of the facilities department has felt that a custodial supervisor position made sense. And now's the time that we're looking forward to implement that recommendation. So these are the proposed service improvements, the summary. This is basically a summary table of all the same information I just presented. And if all those service improvements are added together, it comes in at about $997,000. I want to shift to talk a little bit about capital projects. As I've already alluded to, the town council has, I think, gone on the record now many times in recent months to express its desire to accelerate progress when it comes to addressing aging and deteriorated roads and drainage and other infrastructure. Similarly, we have a number of town buildings that are poorly laid out, undersized, were not designed for the current purposes that they're being used for, and are just sort of generally inadequate either for current needs, but also future needs. They're not going to become more adequate over time. And so we believe there's a need to further study those needs and confront some important capital investment decisions. It's also important to note that there are new funding streams, federal funding streams, that have come online in the last year that really have the potential to help us pursue important projects that would otherwise be a real financial hardship or perhaps even impossible for us to do at a municipal level. And so those funding streams include the American Rescue Plan that we've already talked about, but also the IIJA, which is also sometimes referred to as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or bill. When it comes to capital improvements, this is a distribution of our proposed capital investments for the upcoming fiscal year. Not surprisingly, I think you'd see a distribution similar to this in most any town you frequent, but the large blue wedge, largest blue wedge represents Public Works, and sort of the tan or khaki wedge is facilities. And between Public Works and facilities, this is where you would commonly see the largest areas of capital expense in a given municipality. When it comes to where our capital fund revenues are derived, the largest chunk of this comes from the capital non-recurring fund, about 63%. But as you can see, there are a wide range of other funding sources that are brought to bear, including American Rescue Plan and a variety of other funds, several of which are formula-based. For instance, the infrastructure grant, the LoCIP grant that we receive on an annual basis, that dollar amount doesn't really change from one year to the next. So it's about $5.6 million in revenue sources. When it comes to expenditures, this is actually, I think, showing just essentially in a table form the same thing as the pie chart showed in terms of as a percentage of the overall proposed capital fund expenditure budget, how much is attached to each given functional area. When it comes to our capital non-recurring fund, the largest source of revenue for this fund is a contribution from the general fund. This year's proposed contribution from the general fund, and this is what basically hits the tax rate, is a little over $3 million. I believe that's a $700,000 increase from last year's capital budget, and that just reflects again that we're trying to make more accelerated progress in this area. Our capital non-recurring fund revenue also comes from ambulance user fees and our portion of the Pequot Mohegan grant funds, and the last of which hasn't really changed year to year. Just a quick summary within each of these broader functional areas of what the funding is proposed to be used for. I'm not going to read all of these. I'll focus on a couple examples in each. Within Public Works, the biggest ticket item is road drainage and resurfacing to the tune of $1.3 million. But as I described during my presentation last week, there are a number of projects, including a major Cape Seal project, that while it would normally be part of the capital budget, and you would see it on this list, we're actually looking to use surplus state aid money this year, the FY 21-22 budget, to fund that. So we are honoring the additional investment in capital that we believe the town council wants to make, but we are proposing a funding source that wouldn't hit the books, so to speak, in FY 22-23. It would actually come out of this year's surplus funds. That says what I just said. With respect to town buildings, you can see, based on the sheer number of bullets on this slide, that we have a wide range of facility repairs spanning a large number of buildings, and these needs tend to only increase over time, but we're doing our best to play catch up and not fall behind on our town building capital projects. And then there's also funding in the budget for a couple projects for Mansfield Board of Education. I would point to proposed improvements in the auditorium lighting in Mansfield Middle School. When it comes to public safety, I actually want to use this as an opportunity to point out that some of the projects that show up on this list, while they are capital projects, they are in fact being funded from other funding sources, i.e. American Rescue Plan, and so they are being reported here because they are capital projects, but I don't want to confuse the matter and have you think that we're buying 2 ambulances next year. Use that as an example. The ambulance cost, which is about $300,000, that is being covered by the rescue plan. It's not being paid for with tax dollars on top of that. But a replacement ambulance and an admin vehicle, the extrication equipment is also being funded by rescue plan dollars. I would point out that We need to fund body and vehicle cameras for animal control because in the last couple of years, new legislation, I believe it's called the Police Accountability Act, came into effect and basically creates new statutory requirements for body cameras and vehicle cameras for officers of the law to basically be accountable for what they do and have the ability to prove or disprove what their actions were in a given instance. And so while our state police, any upgrades in their equipment would be covered as part of our contract with the resident trooper program, we need to make similar investments and upgrades for our animal control officers. The capital budget includes funding for the next phase of the municipal facilities conceptual design project. About 3/4 of that proposed budget. The funding has been proposed to come from the American Rescue Plan. There will be more discussion about that in the future. And then a wide range of hardware and software upgrades, and very excited about hopefully being able to finally move forward with some website redevelopment. We've been in need, in my opinion anyway, to update and overhaul the town's website for quite some time. Capital fund projects related to community services. A little over $500,000 in this functional area. Biggest ticket items are open space and park improvements, but cover a wide range of other purposes that, again, we'll be unpacking in more detail during tomorrow night's discussion. Community development. This includes funding for Hunting Lodge Road neighborhood plan. That too is proposed for funding under the rescue plan. The town council has sort of set that aside for further discussion, but it will be a part of a capital improvement plan for future deliberations. Ongoing investment and commitment to our positioning and marketing plan. We've been funding this for several years, and we want to continue to make improvements in implementing that plan, and likewise wayfinding signage implementation plans. We've been doing a lot of exciting work coming up with renderings of new wayfinding signage that'll hopefully make it a lot easier to get from A to B and point out points of interest in the town of Mansfield. When it comes to the general fund transfer to Parks and Rec, as I said earlier, Parks and Rec has experienced some tough years. The last few years with the pandemic have been particularly tough. The FY 21 and 22 budgets both included deficits. This year's budget does project a small positive ratio, if you will, in the sense that projected revenues are expected to exceed projected costs. We're not going to be eliminating the deficit with that, but at least we're not adding to it, which is something we should be happy with. It's an area of improvement. But it's also important to note, I want to point out that my understanding from the relevant history here is that the town council has expressed support for the concept of increasing general fund financial support to the Parks and Rec Fund. Right now, the Parks and Rec Fund receives funding from the general fund that's basically equivalent to the costs associated with the top level administration, so think director and deputy director positions, and then 25% of what's collectively referred to as community programs, and this includes the teen center, bicentennial pond, park operations, youth programs, camp programs, and aquatics. So I am proposing that we actually shift the level of support from the general fund from 25% of community programs to 27.5%. So it's a relatively small incremental shift, but it will help put the Parks and Rec budget on firmer footing. With respect to debt service, the town's general fund debt service obligations are increasing substantially in the next year. I talked about that a little bit already, about $600,000 attributable to debt that will be issued on the new Mansfield Elementary School project, as well as the middle school roof project, and that'll have a 20-year payback period. And we need to also continue to be mindful of the fact that we are looking at the need to borrow additional funds, the amount of which are very much to be determined. That's why we're studying the different options. But some manner of significant investment in the coming years to address shortcomings in existing municipal facilities, as well as Mansfield Middle School. Question from the audience. It's double A, and then there's an alphanumeric character in there. It's a few rungs down from the top. It's considered to be if you were rating, if you thought of it like an A through F scale, it would probably be someplace in the B+ range. There's room for improvement, but substantially higher than many of our peers would be. Sorry. So this just shows, again, graphically what's happening with our debt service. With the debt for the new school coming online, our first debt obligations expected in FY 22-23. It's about a $600,000 increase. And then, as I think everybody knows, whether you're talking about your grocery bill or what you pay at the pump, inflation is at a sort of historical highs right now within the Northeast region. They haven't posted the figures for March yet, I don't believe, but you're looking at inflation approaching 7%. And that, of course, has a lot of implications on our budget when it comes to, what the town anticipates paying for a variety of goods and services. So this is sort of where we're going to close out, because this is what people are often the most interested in. People want to know the impact on the taxpayer. So for a median home, which right now, as of October, the median home value in Mansfield, the median fair market value stood at $228,500, which, given that we assess at 70% of fair market value, translates into an assessed value of just under $160,000. The proposed reduction of 1 mil, a mill rate dropping from 31.38 to 30.38, would be, a small, but would be a decrease in someone's annual tax burden of about $160, or about $13 a month if you prorated it. This just shows on a percentage basis where those tax dollars go. So if you think of it sort of in simple terms, about 60% of your tax dollars go to fund education, and about 40% fund the rest of the work of government. This shows comparable or mill rates for comparative towns that we use to benchmark against. This shows, I believe, all these towns' FY 21-22 tax rates. So like us, other towns are still trying to set their budgets and figure out where their tax rates are going to be. So we don't know where they will all end up in the coming year. But as you can see, if we take the average, which in this case was 35.73, the comparable town average is, a little more than 5 mils higher than our projected mill rate for FY 23. So just to reiterate some of the summary highlights, the budget we're proposing, or I've proposed, would carry a mill rate reduction of 1 mil, would sustain or enhance service levels in multiple priority areas, would meet our contractual non-discretionary obligations, continue our pay-as-you-go capital plan, and ultimately allow us to sustain and enhance our targeted fund balance in the general fund. And the budget that's been proposed is a starting point. And while I think, can all feel pretty good about where things currently stand in terms of the pandemic, and be optimistic that, clearer skies and brighter skies are in front of us, we have to be mindful of the legacy economic impacts of the pandemic, and know that, our fates can change again in the future. Just a reminder that as we look ahead, budget work sessions that we'll be administering, there's the ability to participate virtually. And any citizen questions, comments, or concerns can be emailed to budget2023@mansfieldct.org. And this is the schedule of upcoming meetings. And I just want to end with a note of appreciation for the staff that have provided a lot of feedback and effort along the way to help pull this budget together. Obviously, all department heads do their part, but it's kind of a sprint to the finish, and our finance team and the staff in the town manager's office really have to roll up their sleeves in the last several weeks and get this across the finish line. So much appreciation to all the staff that have helped pull this together, and happy to entertain questions.
Seeing no other questions?
Yeah, just a couple of statements as and questions. I'm Bill Tomeko. I'm kind of new to the area. People think I'm a little stupid. I lived all my life down in Miami, Florida. I'm retired to Connecticut, so I went the other direction. Anyways, I did want to say that this is a darn good start. I mean, it's very clear and it's transparent, and it's very helpful to me. The general fund balance increase. I worked in a very large facility, and we always wanted to have 60 days of operating revenue available for a rainy day fund. Is that, could this be considered like a rainy day fund?
Yeah, it's the percentage. If you broke down the 12 months of the year as a percentage of the overall year, each month is what, 8.3% repeating
Right,
of the overall?
Exactly.
And so you said 2 months. So if you took that 8.3 repeating,
16.6.
right, and so hence the target of 17%, it works out to basically the same logic.
Okay. Then please keep telling people, don't spend it, hold on to it. It's not a whole lot of money to have as a rainy day fund in this environment that we have right now with COVID and so forth. Number two, the fire department. The chief wanted, in your presentation yesterday, you didn't mention it today, he wanted one new fireman on each shift. That would be on the day, evening, and midnight shift. When I used to have to budget, I used to have to budget somewhere between 1.4 and 1.6 FTEs to handle each shift. That would mean you're a little short at 4. Is he just not going to have somebody on the shift when the guy's on vacation, sick, or whatever, or can he bring in a part-timer or something? How's he planning on handling that?
So the way our shifts are set up right now, we have what's called a 5-4 model, and what's being proposed would actually bring us to a 6-5 model. So a shift is actually a 24-hour period.
Oh.
So
okay.
when a member of the fire department, say a full-time member, is on a shift, they work 24 hours, and they're off for 3 days, and then they're on. So that's why they're basically 4 shifts, 4 24-hour periods
That
before
can
the cycle
cover it.
repeats itself. And so 4 new firefighters, 1 for each 24-hour shift. And so it is basically, what's being proposed is consistent with the chief's request. And so it would allow us to go from 5 firefighters on a given shift to 6.
And he doesn't have to worry about holiday vacation, sick time, things of that sort?
Well, when you have somebody who's out or somebody's sick, whether it's a planned or unexpected absence, there are provisions in the union contract that allow for the fire chief to call members back. We try to fill that vacancy with a part-timer first because it's most cost-effective, but if there's no part-time available, there's basically sort of a stepwise sequence that happens that helps us ensure that we fill the org chart for the shift.
But you sure have to pay him even if you bring him back. So did you
Absolutely.
build a little bit of play in there?
Yeah, so one of the
Okay.
hopes is that the additional full-timer, one additional full-time member for each shift will at least marginally reduce some of the overtime that we run into because if, like I said, we have a 5-4 model right now, which means we aim for 5, but we will operate with 4. We just can't go under 4. And so with a 6-5 model, if we have one person out, we can still operate with 5. And so the hope is that it will, reduce the amount of overtime that we need to pay.
I also have been watching your council meetings. In a recent council meeting, somebody in the room indicated they didn't want you filling the potholes because it might make the traffic go faster. We don't all agree with that. If you can move that along and fill more potholes, go to it, guy.
We're always trying to fill the potholes, yep.
Animal control. I didn't see the guy asking for anything extra, and when I go by the animal control, boy, that place is really a dilapidated place. Do we have somebody who is speaking for that area? I know I'm from Florida, and we have the feral cat population down there. You probably don't have up here. The winter takes care of it. But it sure doesn't look like that's a major priority.
So we have one full-time animal control officer. It's actually a gal. It's Naran's her name. And then we have two deputies or assistant animal control officers. And you're right. I don't think anybody would dare to make a representation that our animal control facility or our shelter is, a sort of state-of-the-art, large facility that meets all our needs. In fact, it is one of the facilities, I mentioned the facility study that we've been doing. It's one of the facilities that we know we need to do something to address. And I think one of the things we'll be wrestling with, and the council will be wrestling with in the years ahead, is, that's a service that there could be a lot of healthy debate around regionalization. So does the town need its own animal control, or could we partner with other towns and have a regional service? Perhaps that facility is even located at our animal control facility site, but it becomes a multi-town, and by multi-town, that of course means multiple towns contributing to the budget of the facility. But your points are well taken that, right now we're at a point where I don't know that we would be putting good money after bad if we tried to put more money in the existing about 500 square foot facility. It's way undersized for current needs.
Rescue plan. It really appears like we're swimming in money. It's a nice problem to have. I'm sure we'll find ways to spend it. Hunt Lodge Road neighborhood plan. It's a line that I just saw just a few minutes ago. I don't know what it is. Can you just very briefly, what are you talking about?
Well, this was a project that it was advanced as one of the projects proposed for funding from rescue plan dollars. The council, this isn't a category project that the council has set aside and not said no, but they've said, let's talk about this more. It has not been conditionally approved. And basically the idea here is, because we know that the neighborhood anchor, Goodwin, is going to cease being a school, that the future of that building, of that space, could have a lot of implications for the broader neighborhood. So basically what we're trying to do here is say, okay, well, instead of jumping ahead and proposing an alternative use of Goodwin, whether that's a public use or a private use, we can be mindful of these alternative uses, but let's actually do a study. Let's do a plan for that neighborhood and figure out where the Goodwin property kind of fits into some of these other needs. And so we're trying to take more of a neighborhood, I guess, holistic approach to that particular question than just looking at what the solution, quote unquote, might be within that one parcel.
So no ideas yet. It's something you
Ideas,
just
but no
gotta-
committed direction. That's why we want to do a plan. The ideas would flow from the plan.
I got a vested interest. I sit right next to it. I remember it being built, and I went to first through sixth grade there, with the exception of fourth, where I was right about here, I think. So I'm really interested on what's going to happen with the Goodwin School, and so that's why I ask.
Well, thank you, Bill. I appreciate the comments.
Take care.
Thank you. You too. You can use the chair if you're more comfortable.
Okay, thank you. So, just a couple questions, just to learn about the community. When was the last time, or when is the next assessment or valuation?
So
of real
the
estate?
reval,
Yeah,
it'd be
the-
year after this coming year.
So 24 or 23?
Right, 24.
24. In terms of services, shared services, do you have a separate Parks and Rec from youth services, from community services?
So when it comes to Parks and Rec, all Parks and Rec programs are administered under one umbrella. So the community center, the summer camps, all of that are Parks and Rec. Parks and Rec has a very broad mandate here. It actually includes the passive open space that the town owns. So like, trail maintenance and that sort of thing.
Okay. And I didn't hear you, or I didn't see anything about water pollution control, sewer.
Mhm.
Do you have, are those combined, or are those separate departments in your city?
So
I know they're quasi.
yeah, so on the water side, when it comes to public systems, we receive water from a couple different sources. At the northern end of town, we have Connecticut Water. It's a private utility that services us. In the southern end of town, there's Wyndham Water Works. And so depending on which part of town, if you're on a public water system, you either get your water from Wyndham Water Works, a public utility, or a private utility in Connecticut Water. And then sort of a similar-ish arrangement, I guess, with wastewater, in the sense that at the northern end of town, wastewater is collected and treated by Yukon. They have a wastewater treatment facility. So Yukon owns a lot of sewer pipes and mains in the ground, and the town does as well. So there's portions of the system that the town owns, but we don't have a sewer department. We contract out for work. And then on the southern end of town, again, our wastewater is collected by Wyndham, and we contract out to the town of Wyndham through their sewer operators to maintain the system. So while we own certain sewer assets, we don't own any water assets, we own certain sewer assets, we don't have much in the way of direct maintenance responsibility. We contract out for it, or it's the responsibility of the utility that owns it.
Last question is, back to the retirement fund, general pension fund, all that here. Do you know what your current fund rating is on that? I mean, are you 100% funded? Are you above that? Are you below that?
I believe, and I see our finance director on here, I believe that, so the percent funded it varies from one entity to the other. So I believe the town, I'm in the ballpark of 50% funded. I believe, I'll say, I could have these backwards, I believe that one of the two school districts is either at or very close to fully funded, and the other may be somewhere in the middle. So of the three, the big three, the town, Mansfield Board of Education, and Region 19, I think we are lagging behind in that area. But Charmaine, if you're there, it's been a while since we had this particular brief, maybe you're able to answer that question?
Ryan, I can also contribute something to that question.
Sure.
Both the school systems participate in the state's teacher retirement system, which is underfunded, but the state legislature is proceeding to try to rectify that. They have required towns to make all of their actuarially sound contributions from the very beginning. So the town contributions have always been correct. It's the state contributions that have been failing. So we've always done what we're supposed to do there. Town employees are in the municipal employee system, which is funded entirely by municipal employees and municipalities. And that is it's over 80% funded. It is the one healthy state-administered retirement fund that there is. So
actually, now that you're saying that, Mayor, I'm sorry. The percentages I was thinking of were actually the OPEB liabilities. Didn't occur to me. So You're right. We, sorry, from the pension system standpoint, we're very healthy level. I'm sorry. I was thinking about OPEB, the other post-employment benefits, and that's where we're somewhere around the 50% threshold, and we have some work to be done. But it doesn't look like Charmaine, she might have stepped away from her microphone, so I can't get her to quote those percentages.
The other post-employment benefits are we provide a $250 a month contribution toward health care. And there may be some other minor contributions, but those
Right,
we have been
for
working at.
retirees. Yep.
Yeah, we have been working at increasing those funds on an annual basis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Any other
I
questions?
only have this knowledge because I've been on the council since 2009, and Mr. Aylesworth is only in his 18th month, so, or something like that. So my institutional memory goes back a little bit farther.
But happy to further investigate your question about MERS, and sorry for momentarily confusing OPEB and MERS liabilities, but I don't see any other questions from folks in the room, and I don't see any other public. So I think, Madam Mayor, that this concludes our presentation and discussion tonight.
Okay, well, I will declare the public hearing on the 22-23
Public information
budget.
meeting. We have a public hearing next Monday, so just don't conflate the two.
Public information meeting, I'm sorry. This is the manager's budget. After the council works its will, we will come back with another version of this, depending on what the council decides to do. So this is obviously not the final form. This is what the town manager has provided and is informing the community of. Any comments that members of the community want to make on this budget can be made directly to the council through all of our mechanisms for public comment, by email to the council, by signing into the public comment sections of our upcoming meetings. There are plenty of ways to address us, particularly with your concerns. We pay attention to absolutely every comment that comes to us. So thank you very much for paying attention tonight, and stay tuned. This is a work in progress. And with that, I will declare this public hearing, public information session closed. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Recording stopped.